New rules, team games, and bad strategies. This week I'm chatting all about the Monaco Grand Prix. So get ready, because you've been summoned to the steward's office. Hello everyone and welcome back to the steward's office. I'm Syra and this week Formula 1 headed out to the Principality of Monaco for the Monaco Grand Prix, also known as the jewel in the crown of Formula 1. It can be a slightly controversial Grand Prix, let's be honest. Some people love it, some people hate it because we don't get a lot going on there. And F1 did try and actually remedy that this year. It was the big headline going into this weekend because the FIA introduced a mandatory 2-stop for the Monaco Grand Prix. Now, every other GP on the calendar, it's a mandatory 1-stop. The drivers have to use 2 tyre compounds unless it's a wet race and the intermediate or wet tyres are used. Monaco, they forced the drivers to have a 2-stop strategy, meaning that 3 sets of tyres were going to have to be used in the race. They were hoping it would make the on-track action a little bit more exciting and bring something more to the race, because the 2024 race was not great. We didn't really have many overtakes after really early pit stops. So their hope was, that mandatory 2-stop would cause some different strategies, would mean that drivers would be pushing even harder, and that would lead to different things happening on track. And we'll get into whether or not that actually worked for the teams. Before we even got into quali though, there were some issues that we had during practice, which tends to happen in Monaco. It is a super tight track, it's a street circuit, and it's just one of those tracks where accidents are bound to happen. Ollie Behrman's bad luck has continued this season as he entered the Monaco Grand Prix weekend. He ended up with a 10-place grid penalty for overtaking during one of the red flags that we had during practice. And Lance Stroll also got a 1-place grid penalty for an incident that he had with Oscar Piastri in FP1. You don't tend to get a lot of grid penalties and things when we hit practice and incidents happen. Things like impeding don't really matter as much, but overtaking during a red flag is a serious incident. It's not meant to happen at all for the safety of all of the drivers and everyone at the track. And the incident between Lance and Oscar in FP1 could have been quite dangerous. His race engineer did let him know that Oscar was coming up, but Lance wasn't able to hear him and they did opt to penalise him for that. Quali was an interesting one though, and qualifying is the big session of the Monaco Grand Prix weekend, not so much the race, because Monaco is such a qualifying dependent track. You have to qualify well here because overtaking chances are slim to none, basically. If you're making up places, it's generally going to be because someone made a mistake, it was because of pit stops, or because someone's DNF'd, essentially. It tends to happen a lot in the pit lane, that's why we see a lot of overtakes happen, not so much on track. So qualifying can get a little bit dicey at times because the drivers are putting absolutely everything into it because they know it's hard to make up those spaces come Sunday. Both Alpines exited in Q1. They're really not doing too well at the moment, but Franco Colapinto and Pierre Gasly weren't able to get fast enough lap times in. They did try on the medium tyres and it didn't work for them. They swapped over to the softs and it still was not working for them. So some troubles for Alpine that seemed to continue. Kimi Antonelli, who didn't have a great race in Imola, had to DNF from that. Ended up crashing at the end of Q1. I think he was on a fast lap and his time was fast enough to get him into Q2, but he was not able to actually take part in that session. So he was starting in P15. And to add to Mercedes' troubles, George Russell managed to get out in Q2, went over a curb and lost power with his power unit and had to stop in the tunnel, and he tried so hard to get that car restarted, but it did not work. The marshals ended up having to push his car back, which I can't lie was a slightly funny thing to see, but heartbreaking for George Russell. And that was both Mercedes cars out in Q2. The power unit issue though, it seems like something similar happened to Kimi Antonelli in Imola, which is why he DNF'd. And it is slightly concerning. Mercedes had a pretty good start to the season. They're currently P2 in the Constructors' Championship, but it seems that there are little gremlins that are starting to creep up on them now. And after leading all 3 practice sessions, Charles Leclerc did not manage to make it on pole. He looked so close to doing it though. He looked like it was in his reach, but Lando Norris at the last moment managed to snatch pole position. But an amazing effort from Ferrari, and yeah, Lando Norris on pole position for the Monaco Grand Prix, and a front row start for both of them. I'm pretty sure they were going to be happy with that. Other than that though, in quali we had Isaac Hadjar in the Visa Cash App Racing Bulls qualifying in P5. Now that is his best qualifying position of the season so far, but it also marks the first time a rookie has managed to make it into the top 5 in qualifying for the Monaco Grand Prix since Lewis Hamilton in 2007. But chatting about Lewis Hamilton, he also managed what I think is his best qualifying this season so far and landed in P4. Sadly, that P4 was not going to last though, right? Because he ended up having a bit of an incident with Max Verstappen where he was deemed to be impeding and ended up having a grid place penalty of 3 places. And honestly, what the most infuriating bit of all of this is that it genuinely was not Lewis's fault here. Lewis Hamilton was on a slow lap and on the racing line, and Riccardo Adami had told Lewis that Max Verstappen wasn't on a fast lap, and we saw the replay of everything and you could clearly tell that Max was on a fast lap because Lewis didn't know that he was on a fast lap. He was told by his engineer he's going slowly. Lewis didn't move out of the way and Max ended up having to swerve out of the way off the racing line on his fast lap, and the stewards ended up having to give Lewis a penalty. I don't even know whether to call it a communication issue because it's not even like anything was misunderstood or a radio message was missed by Lewis. It's literally that his race engineer gave him the completely wrong information. A P4 in Monaco would have been a brilliant start for Lewis. It could have meant him potentially being on a podium, but P7 was going to be a hard start for him. So slightly infuriating, and I can't lie, it bugged me so much, and I know it did for a lot of people as well. And even Max afterwards, when he heard what happened and when Lewis explained and he saw himself, was like, this really wasn't Lewis's fault. But that's enough about quali. Let's have a chat about the race and what happened with the top 3 that are battling for that Drivers' Championship right now. Starting off with who is currently leading the standings, Oscar Piastri, who did not have the best strategy given to him on race day, okay? He didn't really have a chance to battle for the win. He had an awful pit stop from the team really early on in the race that put him behind Charles Leclerc, and yeah, I think at that point battling for a win was out of the question. Towards the end of the race he managed to catch up with Charles again, who was fighting with Lando, but it just wasn't enough. Maybe with a couple more sort of laps, but even then, because overtaking is non-existent in Monaco, it wouldn't have made a whole load of difference. Still finished in P3 though, so it's not a bad shout for him at all, but strategy was not on his side. The other McLaren driver though of Lando Norris, pole position on Saturday and the win on Sunday. This was his first ever win for the Monaco Grand Prix. He has 5 career wins now, and I think for Lando this was something that he really needed this weekend because he hasn't won a race since the opening race of the season. So I think this was going to be a really big boost for him to carry on mounting that challenge for the Drivers' Championship and to Oscar Piastri. But you could see how much that race win in Monaco meant, and it means a lot for any driver. So it was great to see him on the top step of the podium. And then Max Verstappen, who didn't have an awful weekend. Qualifying was not great. He qualified in P5 and then finished in P4. That Red Bull, it's such an interesting car when you watch it race and qualify and through practices, because sometimes it does look really, really quick, but it does seem to just struggle at moments in the race. There was a point where Max said his gears felt like he was driving the 1972 Monaco Grand Prix. You can just tell that there are points in the race he's really not happy with the car. Even though it might have good pace compared to the rest of the field, it's still not what he wants. And I found it so interesting that the team Red Bull did not give him the best set of tyres going into the race. I think he had a used pair of soft tyres that were left and then a set of hard tyres that he was starting the race with and then a set of mediums. McLaren had left 2 sets of hard tyres for the race. The softs weren't holding up for long anyway. So not a lot of the teams really opted to keep a set of those back. So I don't really know what Red Bull were doing with his tyre allocation there. But I think it did make the race a little bit more difficult for him in that respect. But I think P4 is still pretty good and probably the maximum he could have gotten out of race day. The Constructors' Championship is also starting to look a little bit interesting at the front because Ferrari had a pretty good weekend. Charles Leclerc finished in P2 at his home Grand Prix, and then Lewis Hamilton, even though he started in P7, Ferrari did a wonderful job with the pit stops and their strategy, and he managed to make it into P5. Those haul of points have meant that they're only 1 point behind Red Bull and 5 points behind Mercedes, who are currently in P2 for the championship. McLaren are just running away with P1 at the moment. And at this point, I think we can say that there's no battle for P1. The Constructors' Championship, at this point at least, right? Don't know what's going to happen later on in the season. Right now it does look like McLaren have firmly got that in their grasp, but for P2 it seems to be getting a little bit more competitive, and Ferrari are finding their feet this season, finding the rhythm they need to get into, and Monaco really helped them catch up with the 2 teams that are ahead of them. So that's going to be quite interesting going into the next few rounds and before we get into summer break. But that was everything going on at the top of the field. What happened further down? Midfield was interesting. Gabriel Bortoleto ended up going into a barrier first lap of the race, but managed to reverse out and carry on going. That caused the first VSC. We had Fernando Alonso retiring on lap 38 of the race with a power unit issue. I don't know whether there's just something going on with the Mercedes engines at the moment, but the engines are not happy, and Fernando once again has not scored points in a race this season, and it is gutting because it looked like Monaco was going to be an amazing chance for him to get his first points of the season. He got into Q3, qualified really well. I think he started the race in P6 or P8, I want to say. It was one of those two. He was around Lewis Hamilton, and I honestly thought, great, he's going to finally get his first points of the season, and it wasn't meant to be. He was gutted, and yeah, we move on to Spain, which is his home race, and hopefully, fingers crossed, he will get points there. Some interesting team games going on, teamwork and team strategies that were going on in this race because of that 2-stop. Liam Lawson held up a large pack of the cars behind him, giving his teammate Isaac Hadjar enough of a pit window that he could pit and come out into clean air, and it worked brilliantly. It's not something that you want to see, and Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon were doing the same thing for each other further back as well. And I get it, it's not something we want to see in Formula 1 because it's not fun racing, it's not interesting to watch. And Fernando Alonso, I think in the 2024 Monaco GP, did something very similar because I can remember Lewis getting very annoyed behind him. They're games that you do have to play though, even though you don't necessarily want to, because of the way that Monaco track is, because of this mandatory 2-stop strategy. Teams are going to play those games where they will purposely go slowly on a track they know that drivers can't overtake on, to hold other drivers up and let their teammate have that clean air to come out into. Worked a treat for all of them, to be fair. They all did a really good job. Liam Lawson did brilliantly. I get it though, it's not exciting to watch. And for the Williams one though, what I absolutely loved afterwards, because James was on the pit wall with Sky F1 and it said, look, this isn't what we want to do, but we have to. And apparently he ended up texting Toto during the race saying, really sorry about this, but we have to do it, because they were holding up the Mercedes cars. Talking about Toto though, and Mercedes, right. They were a bit of a midfield car this race. They didn't get out of Q2, started P15 and P14, and ran an interesting strategy. It was a bad strategy, let's just get to it. It was a really bad strategy, guys, because in a mandatory 2-stop race, they didn't pit either driver until the last few laps of the race. I don't know what happened. I think they were probably holding out for a safety car or a red flag, which I do get, statistically, we got a lot of them in Monaco, but it didn't work out for Mercedes, and they came away with absolutely no points at the Monaco GP, which is the first time that they have walked away from an F1 weekend pointless since Australia 2024. It has been a little while for the team, so this was a really rough weekend, both in qualifying and in the race. Like I said, they had a really good start to the season. They're still P2 in the constructors, but, you know, the DNF from Kimi and Imola, and then the issues that they've had in quali and in the race this weekend. It's been a rough start to this triple header, and let's hope the end of it is a little better for them, because like I said, Ferrari are creeping up now. Chaos and drama going on at the Monaco Grand Prix, though we did have a little bit of it. Kicking off really early in the race, we had an incident between Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda. That was around lap 9. Gasly went straight into the back of Yuki Tsunoda, said that his brakes weren't working after that incident, and he couldn't stop on track and had to go into the pits where a set of mechanics had to stop his car, and Gasly ended up being a DNF for the race, so Alpine continuing to struggle. The other little bit of drama we had was from George Russell and Alex Albon, because George Russell ended up cutting a corner and overtaking Alex Albon. The race director's rules for this race were that you had to give that place back. If not, you were going to get a penalty if you overtook in a specific corner. Forgive me for not remembering the name right now, guys. I am very tired. But George had overtaken Alex, had said, look, Alex was going so slowly, it was dangerous and everything, didn't give the place back, and said down the radio, when his engineer said you need to give it back, George's like, no, I'll take the penalty. It's a 5-second penalty, and if George felt like he could make up the time, stewards had heard that radio message and opted to give him a drive-through penalty. And that is essentially where a car has to come into the pits, drive through the pit lane, and then come back out, so they lose around about 20 seconds. I can't lie, I do think it's fair, because the drivers and F1 in general have spoken about this when it comes to going off track, gaining an advantage, and then having to take that penalty. Nearly all the drivers will opt to just take the 5-second penalty rather than give the place back, because it's just easier that way. And it feels like there sometimes needs to be something harsher in place, especially when you have a driver on the radio saying, no, I'll just take the penalty, I'm not going to give it back. So I don't blame the stewards for giving him a drive-through penalty. I kind of miss the drive-throughs. They're very harsh, but I think they do need to be brought out, for instance, like that. But there was also issues over at Ferrari. Even though they had a pretty decent weekend, Lewis Hamilton and Riccardo Adami have continued having issues, because I can't for the life of me understand what happened over this weekend. Qualifying was bad enough when your engineer has cost you 3 places after qualifying in P4 because he's given you completely the wrong information, like the exact opposite of what is happening. Then you add on to the fact that Lewis during the race had asked, right, are the guys ahead of me still a minute ahead? Adami comes back telling him all of the tyre compounds the drivers in front of him are on, which really wasn't the information that Lewis was asking for or needed. I didn't listen to Lewis's onboards, but from what I've heard from people who did listen to it, it was a very lonely race for Lewis, who was pretty lost during the Monaco Grand Prix because he wasn't being given much information. By the end of the race, after the checkered flag, Lewis being on the radio just to say well done to the team, thank you for rebuilding the car, because he did have a bit of a crash in FP3, so they got the car ready again for him for quali, thanked them and said that they all did good work, and there was no reply from his engineer, to which Lewis then was like, "Were you mad at me or something? I'm really not sure what's going on there, and this isn't a one-off. I mean, since the beginning of the season, it's been a little bit iffy between the two of them." And I think a lot of us just put it down to teething problems, right? It's a new engineer, a new team, and they're both trying to get used to each other. But this weekend felt just horrifically worse. So I think we are getting to a stage where swapping Adami out for someone else will probably be more helpful. Whether or not it happens is a completely different thing. But beyond just, not always giving Lewis the correct information, and, it can be a little annoying. The incident with quali could have been worse. Max could have ended up crashing into Lewis, and it really wouldn't have been either of the driver's faults, and that is a big issues. So we'll see if Ferrari opt to do anything. I'm not sure that they will, but I think it is needed. Overall for this race though, that two-stop strategy that the FIA brought in for Monaco did not work. It wasn't an interesting race. It wasn't fun to watch. And what it resulted in is a lot of teams just playing games with each other and holding cars up so their other driver could pit. It's just not something that's working. Monaco is struggling with F1 cars, and it's not something that other series are struggling with. Formula E has an insane, incredible amount of overtakes when they head to Monaco. The problem F1 has is this generation of cars is not suited for Monaco anymore. They're too big, they're too heavy, and in a cost cap era as well, drivers aren't willing to take the risk to get damage to their cars. I don't know if they're going to continue this two-stop strategy into 2026, but if they do, some more nuances need to be had. You know, one pit stop has to be done in the first half of the race, the second one has to be done in the second half. Something around maybe holding the teams up and everything. I don't know, but what they did this year just did not work. Let's move on to our winners and losers for this GP though, starting off with our winners, and of course I have Lando Norris on there for winning his first ever Monaco Grand Prix and now becoming another multiple race winning driver for this season. Charles Leclerc is also on that list, as gutted as I was that he didn't get the win, and he looked so close at times. To be on the podium at his home Grand Prix is still an amazing feat, and the Ferrari is looking a lot better. And it has meant, regardless of the communication issues that one side of the garage was facing, I have put Ferrari on this list because I was concerned for them coming into Monaco because qualifying hasn't always been strong for them this season. I don't know what they did, but it worked for them this race. And yeah, to not be that far off of third and second place in the constructors, I think is something they should be celebrating. Losers for this race, Fernando Alonso is on there after that DNF, which I am gutted about. Yuki Tsunoda didn't manage to get into the points, and I think that incident with Pierre Gasly probably did some damage to his car. And also Oscar Piastri, who had that awfully slow pit stop that I think hampered his race a fair bit, even though he did end up on the podium. Next race though is the Spanish Grand Prix, and we have a new technical directive coming in about the flexi wings. They are flat out banned from the Spanish GP, and a lot of the chat around the paddock is this going to impact some of the teams? Mainly McLaren. I've also heard whispers about Mercedes, and then it'll be the end of our triple header. So Spain, I think, is going to be a pretty interesting race to watch, just to see whether that technical directive does make any kind of impact at all, because it might not, but we'll wait and see. Thank you guys so much for listening, and diolch far. Make sure you find me on TikTok and Instagram at stewards_office, and I will see you guys the next time you're summoned to the Stewards office.